Hey, everybody. Happy Thursday. I had a thought I wanted to share with you today. Take it as it's useful. I've been reading through the book of Genesis in a way of reflecting on my faith at the beginning of this year and come to the end or towards the end of the book with the story of Joseph. And if you're not familiar, Joseph was one of the 12 sons of Israel who was sold into slavery by his brothers. He was talking a little too much about his dreams that God had given him for his life. And his brothers weren't too receptive to that. His 10 oldest brothers had different opinions of how to get rid of him, but ultimately he ended up in slavery in Egypt. And Joseph's dreams do come to pass. Many years later, there's a famine in the land. Joseph's brothers come to him and they come in search of resources. They don't recognize Joseph, but he recognizes them. And ultimately, there's a reunion and everything turns out well. I want to talk about the story, a little bit about how I learned it, generally speaking, growing up in the Christian tradition, and something I noticed on this read through. The way this story is often framed in my memory, my experiences, is, and I'm sort of paraphrasing, that Joseph says to his brothers, what you intended for harm, God intended for good. That his brothers intended to harm him by doing away with him, and he found a way, God found a way, together they found a way to make good out of this difficult situation. And Joseph comes out better off, right? He comes out in a position of power in both his personal and professional lives, and he's able to save the day for his family of origin, you might say. But something I noticed on this read through was the difference in the dynamic between Joseph and his brothers when they see one another for the first time. Joseph recognizes, scripture tells us Joseph recognizes his brothers, his 10 eldest brothers, but they do not recognize him. And Joseph's 10 brothers are quite fearful. They have all kinds of thinking patterns in the scripture that, this is retribution, even though they don't recognize Joseph. This is retribution for what they've done to their brother, that there's a famine, or that they're being mistreated by people in power, or they're very afraid. I know I'm kind of paraphrasing the scripture here, but they're a very fearful bunch. And even in the back and forth of the story, when they go home to their father, Israel himself is not exactly a stalwart figure of insight and calm in this moment. And what we notice is that, again, the story plays towards everyone's favor in the end, but really with Joseph as the main architect, the one who has agency in the story to make things better and to retain his own. Like, we see Joseph in scripture as someone who has a lot of self-control, and he's very level-headed. But I want to think about it a little bit differently, in that I want us to take a perspective of how we might look at any story, which is that the figures in the story are also aspects we find within ourselves. And so within this dynamic, I wonder if we can recognize within us that the calm and level-headed, maybe a little bit trickster-like, perhaps, Joseph, and sort of trying to orchestrate and understand what's happening with his family without revealing himself. And this fearful bunch of brothers, if these aren't two dynamics that exist within each of us, that there is a part of us that is very level-headed, that is trying to understand, that is working to get to the root of our own story. And there's a part of us that's very fearful and can come up with lots of reasons why things aren't going to work out for us. And it presents to me a new reading of the story, even after so many readings of the story, to think about how we can reclaim within ourselves these aspects of us that feel disparate or broken, that the story that we thought might never get resolved in a good way can get resolved in not just a good way, but a really beautiful way. I was listening to a couple of talks given by Dr. Ian McGilchrist, who is a psychiatrist, And a couple of his ideas that I wanted to bring to mind. The first is attention is a moral act. In the story, the 10 brothers' attention is consistently on what they've done wrong, on trying to make amends, perhaps as the story goes along, but for a very long time on this heaviness of the story that they're carrying, the secret that they've kept from their father about what happened to Joseph, and their certainty that they are in trouble. And Joseph continues to keep his attention on this idea that God has continued to work his story out for good. So Dr. McGilchrist saying attention is a moral act, I think has a lot of weight for us, not only in terms of how we turn our attention outward, but how we turn our attention inward as well. What part of my own story am I focusing on? How am I finding a way to embrace all the aspects of myself lovingly and patiently, knowing that doesn't happen all at once, right? When Joseph embraces his brothers, he embraces them one at a time. The other quote from Dr. McGilchrist is, "We midwife being into existence." We get to author our own knowing, which is actually Dr. Lisa Miller, to blend my references here. But we are writing our story. We're gifted so many beautiful stories in our life, but we still get to be authors in our own capacity, in our own ability. Remember that our mind quite often will pick up a story that is wrong rather than sit in the midst of uncertainty. Uncertainty can feel just too scary. So give yourself pause to notice what stories you're telling yourself. And remember that each of us still has agency in the midst of this software that's running sometimes very fearful programming. We still have agency to pause, to rewrite the code, to quote Dr. Martha Beck, a sociologist who talks about this kind of stuff, and to think about what story we want to tell. We don't have to get rid of the 10 brothers, the parts of us that felt perhaps unkind or deceitful in earlier parts of the narrative. We can embrace the part of ourself that is Joseph, that is level-headed, that is connected to our faith, our sense of transcendence and spirituality. And we can embrace the parts of ourselves that don't feel so lovable all the time. Just a few thoughts for your Thursday. Be well, and remember, you got this.